Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the incredible, nearly 400-year story of the Spanish Catholic Church in the Philippines. And let me tell you, it is a story of faith, power, and revolution that is so much more complicated than you probably think. And really, this is the big question, isn't it? We're going to explore how an institution that was, for all intents and purposes, a tool of conquest, also became this place of injustice, and then somehow the very thing that gave birth to a national identity. It's a wild ride. So, our story kicks off with the arrival of the Spanish. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just a military operation. No, this was a spiritual conquest, a mission that was given the green light from the absolute highest level. I mean, just listen to these words. With this papal bull, the Pope literally sliced up the undiscovered world and handed a massive piece of it to Spain and Portugal. This gave the Spanish crown what they saw as a divine mandate, basically God's permission slip to go build an empire. Okay, so let's break down this really key idea, the Patronato Real. This system basically fused the church and the state together in the colonies. It meant the king was the boss of the church, controlling who got appointed and how things were run. So every missionary wasn't just a preacher, he was also an agent of the Spanish crown. And this merger of power? It very quickly became the first edge of that double-edged sword we're talking about. It gave a kind of spiritual cover for the often brutal reality of colonial rule. So you know, the mission to save souls was often used to justify some pretty worldly exploitation. We're talking about so-called just wars against native populations, demanding these crushing tributes of gold or goods, and forcing people into labor to build the very churches they were supposed to worship in. And this complaint from local Filipino leaders just lays bare the human cost. It was a system built for cruelty. I mean, think about it. Local chiefs were punished if their people ran away from the abuse or even died. It created this impossible, vicious cycle of debt and punishment. It's just heartbreaking. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Within this exact same system of oppression, a second, completely opposite edge of the sword starts to emerge. And it came from the one place you'd least expect it, the church itself. So with all the greed from the conquistadors and the incredible suffering of the local people, did anyone at all dare to speak up for them? Well, the answer is a big, resounding yes. And what's so incredible is who this is coming from. This wasn't just some random priest whispering in a corner. This was a bombshell from the head of the powerful Augustinian order, Fray Martin de Rada. He's basically saying the entire Spanish project in the Philippines is illegal and immoral. That's a huge deal.
You see, these friars became a really important check on colonial power. They used their ultimate spiritual weapon. Think about this. They would refuse to hear the confession of abusive officials and deny them absolution. They were reminding these powerful men that, hey, your eternal soul is on the line here.
So you have this massive internal conflict that really defines the church for centuries. But the real turning point, the moment that lit the fuse for revolution, actually came from the single biggest failure of the entire Spanish mission. For more than 200 years, the Spanish church just flat out refused to develop a native Filipino clergy. Just look at this breakdown. The leadership was almost entirely Spanish. It created this super rigid racial hierarchy inside an institution that's supposed to be for everyone. And this quote from an archbishop, wow, it just lays out the deeply racist thinking they used to justify it. The argument was basically that Filipinos just weren't smart enough or moral enough to be priests, and that they had to be treated like children forever. It's incredibly condescending. So here's the critical part. The fight for equality inside the church becomes the breeding ground for nationalism. All through the 1800s, Filipino priests are demanding to run their own parishes. By the 1860s, it's a full-blown movement. But then in 1872, there's a local mutiny, and the Spanish authorities use it as an excuse to blame the movement's leaders and sentence them to death. Now, the public execution of these three priests, Fathers Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, was meant to completely crush this movement. But it did the exact opposite. Instead of putting out the fire, they basically threw gasoline on it, igniting a blaze that would forge an entire nation.
And get this, 2 years before the executions, Archbishop Martinez sent this chillingly accurate letter to Spain. He warned them. He said, hey, if you keep suppressing the Filipino clergy, you're going to turn this into an anti-Spanish movement, and it could easily explode into a massive fire. He absolutely called it. And just like that, the execution changed everything. The fight for a Filipino-led church became the same thing as the fight for a free Filipino nation. It was inseparable. And those three priests, Gomburza,
They became the very first martyrs and heroes of the Philippine Revolution.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. It's kind of mind-bending, right? The story of the church in the Philippines shows us how an institution that helped lock in foreign rule also, somehow, provided the language, the leaders, and even the martyrs to eventually overthrow it. A double-edged sword, indeed.